The microphone drops. Elvis stops mid-lyric. 18,000 people frozen. He walks to the stage edge, kneels down, extends his hand into the darkness. A woman in the front row, face wet with tears, stares up at him. The band behind him silent. The lights still burning. And then he does something nobody expected. This is that story. Las Vegas, 1975. The International Hotel. Elvis Presley at the height of his power, 3 nights into a 2-week residency that would gross over $2 million. The jumpsuit, white, studded with turquoise and gold. The voice, still commanding, still capable of shaking souls. The crowd, sold out, 17 rows deep, people who'd driven across state lines just to see him breathe. But tonight was different. Tonight something was about to break through the spectacle. Through the lights, through the rehearsed moves, through the carefully orchestrated show that had become Elvis Presley's life. Tonight, protocol would shatter. And everyone in that arena would witness the man behind the legend do what the legend was never supposed to do. Margaret Walsh sat in row 3, seat 14. 42 years old. Gray streaks in her dark hair, she hadn't bothered to dye. A simple floral dress she'd worn to her son's funeral 6 months earlier. The ticket in her purse, a gift from her sister who thought maybe, just maybe, seeing Elvis might bring her back to life. Might make her smile again. Might remind her that joy still existed somewhere in the universe. She hadn't smiled since March. Since the day they told her the leukemia had won. Since she'd held Danny's hand as his breathing got slower, quieter, until it stopped. He was 14. He loved baseball. He loved his dog. And he loved Elvis Presley with a devotion that seemed almost sacred in a boy so young. But what Margaret didn't know, what nobody in that arena knew, was that Elvis had seen her the moment he walked on stage. The show started like they always did. CC Rider. Exploding through the speakers, Elvis spinning, the crowd on their feet, cameras flashing like lightning. He moved through the setlist with precision. I got a woman, love me, trying to get to you. Each song a performance, each gesture calculated from years of doing this exact thing in this exact way. But between songs, during the brief moments when he'd sip water or adjust his scarf, his eyes kept drifting back to row 3. To the woman who wasn't screaming. Who wasn't reaching out. Who sat perfectly still while everyone around her erupted in ecstasy. Her face illuminated by the stage lights, tears streaming down silently, continuously, like rain on glass. The band kicked into. You gave me a mountain. Elvis took the microphone, his voice filling the arena with that opening line about climbing his way to heaven. The song about grief, about loss, about burdens too heavy to carry alone. And then, in the second verse, something shifted. His voice cracked. Not the performative crack he'd sometimes add for emotional effect. A real crack. A break in the armor. He glanced down at Margaret again. She was holding something in her hands, clutching it like a lifeline. From the stage, he couldn't tell what it was, but the way her fingers gripped it made his chest tighten. Elvis Presley stopped singing mid-sentence. The band, confused, continued for 2 more bars before the music died. 18,000 people went completely silent. He handed the microphone to a stagehand without a word. Walked to the edge of the stage. Knelt down. The spotlight followed him, confused. Someone in the crowd gasped. Security started moving toward him, but he waved them off with a sharp gesture. His knees hit the stage floor. He reached his hand out into the darkness, past the lights, toward Margaret Walsh. Ma'am, he said loud enough for the front rows to hear even without amplification. Will you come up here with me? Margaret froze. People around her turned, staring. Her sister beside her whispered urgently. He's talking to you. Go. Go. But Margaret couldn't move. Couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't real. This was Elvis Presley. This was Las Vegas. This was a show. People didn't just stop shows. Elvis didn't pull his hand back. Kept it extended. Waiting. Please, he said. And there was something in his voice, not the performer's voice, not the celebrity's voice, but something raw and human and impossibly gentle that made Margaret stand up. Security helped her climb onto the stage, her legs shaking, the entire arena watching. She stepped into the blinding light, and suddenly she was standing next to Elvis Presley in front of 18,000 people, and she had no idea why. He took both her hands in his, looked directly into her eyes. The crowd a distant roar now, meaningless. He spoke quietly, just to her, but the microphone the stagehand had placed nearby caught every word. "What's your name?" "Margaret." Her voice barely audible. "Margaret. What are you holding?" She looked down at her hands, at the small object she'd been clutching since she sat down. A baseball. Signed. Danny's most prized possession. Mickey Mantle, 1961. The one thing she'd brought with her tonight because leaving it at home felt like leaving him behind. "It's my son's," she whispered. Elvis nodded slowly. "What's his name?" "Danny." Was. His name was Danny. The arena, somehow, got even quieter. You could hear Margaret breathing. Elvis didn't let go of her hands. "Tell me about Danny." And then something broke inside Margaret Walsh. Something that had been held together with wire and prayer for 6 months split open. The words came pouring out, about Danny's laugh, about his terrible jokes, about how he'd play "Can't Help Falling in Love" on repeat until she'd threatened to hide the record player. About the leukemia. About the hospital. About how his last request was to see Elvis perform, but he died 3 weeks before the tour was announced. Subscribe now, because what happens next will change how you see Elvis Presley forever. Elvis listened to every word. Didn't interrupt. Didn't perform. Just listened. His thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. When she finished, when the words ran out and only the crying remained, he pulled her into a hug. A real hug. Not a celebrity photo op hug. A hug that said, "I see you. I see your pain. You are not alone." The audience watched in stunned silence. Some people were crying now. Others stood with hands over their mouths. The band members behind them looked at each other, uncertain. Nobody knew what to do. This wasn't in the script. Elvis pulled back, still holding her shoulders. "Danny loved music?" Margaret nodded. "Then let's give him a song." He turned to the band. "Can't Help Falling in Love." Slow. The opening notes filled the arena. Elvis took the baseball from Margaret's hands, held it up to the light, looked at it like it was the most important object in the world. Then he placed it carefully in his pocket, took the microphone, and started singing. But here's the part nobody expected. The part that would be talked about for decades. Elvis didn't sing to the crowd. He sang to Margaret. Every line directed at her. Every word a gift. And then, in the second verse, he gestured to the audience. 18,000 people understood instantly. They joined in. Not screaming, not shouting, singing. Soft. Reverent. A choir of strangers singing for a grieving mother and her son who would never hear it. Margaret stood on that stage, surrounded by light and sound and more love than she'd felt since March, and for the first time in 6 months she smiled. Not a big smile. Not a happy smile. But a smile that said, "Maybe I can survive this. Maybe there's still something beautiful left in the world." The song ended. The arena erupted. But Elvis raised his hand for quiet. Reached into his pocket. Pulled out a white scarf from around his neck, one of the ones he'd throw to the crowd, but this one different. This one he wore the entire show. He tied it gently around the baseball Margaret had brought. "This is for Danny," he said. "From all of us." He handed it back to her. She clutched it to her chest. He hugged her one more time, whispered something in her ear that no microphone caught, that nobody would ever know. Then he helped her off the stage, back to her seat, where her sister wrapped her in arms and everyone around them was crying. Elvis returned to center stage. Picked up the microphone. Looked out at the crowd with eyes that were red but steady. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being human with us tonight." The show continued. But everyone there knew they'd witnessed something that transcended entertainment. After the performance, Elvis did something else unusual. He asked his manager to find Margaret. Brought her backstage. Gave her a photo of himself signed. For Danny? He's got the best seat in heaven now. Love, Elvis. Gave her his personal phone number. Told her if she ever needed anything, to call. And he meant it. Margaret Walsh kept that baseball wrapped in that scarf for the rest of her life. When she died in 2003, she was buried with it. Her daughter, who'd been 9 when Danny died, said her mother never stopped talking about that night. About how Elvis Presley stopped being Elvis Presley and became just a man who understood pain. Who chose compassion over spectacle. Who reminded her that grief doesn't have to be carried alone. Share this story and subscribe, because moments like this deserve to be remembered. The International Hotel show became legendary. People who were there told their children about it. Then their grandchildren. News articles appeared, small ones at first, then bigger ones as the years went on. The night Elvis stopped the show for a grieving mother. When the king became human. The concert that made 18,000 people cry. But here's what most people don't know. Elvis kept Margaret's letter. She'd written to him after that night, thanking him, telling him that he'd given her permission to live again. He kept it in his dressing room for years. Would read it before shows when he was tired, when the pills weren't working, when being Elvis felt like too much weight to carry. He never told anyone about the letter. But the people close to him noticed that after that night in 1975, something shifted. He started pausing more during shows. Looking into the crowd differently. Calling people up on stage not just for photo ops, but for real conversations. He'd spot someone crying, someone hurting, and the show would stop. Protocol would break. The spectacle would pause for humanity. The Memphis Mafia, his inner circle, said that Margaret's story affected him profoundly. That it reminded him why he started singing in the first place. Not for the money or the fame or the screaming fans. But because music could heal. Because a voice could reach into someone's darkness and pull them toward light. Because sometimes stopping a show was more important than finishing it. That baseball, wrapped in Elvis's scarf, now sits in a private collection. Margaret's daughter donated it after her mother passed. The Graceland Museum curator who cataloged it said that when they unwrapped the scarf to examine it, they found something else folded inside, a handwritten note from Elvis to Danny. Keep swinging for the fences, kid. I'll see you on the other side. E.P. Nobody knows when he wrote it. Margaret never mentioned it. But he'd slipped it in there that night, wrapped in the scarf, a message for a boy who'd never read it in this life but maybe, just maybe, somewhere else. The legacy of that night extends far beyond one grieving mother and one compassionate performer. Today, the International Hotel is the Westgate Las Vegas Resort. They have a plaque in the showroom commemorating that 1975 residency. It doesn't mention Margaret by name, she'd asked for privacy while alive, but it does mention the night Elvis Presley reminded us that humanity matters more than showmanship. Other performers have cited that moment as inspiration. When Lady Gaga brought a bullied teen on stage in 2012. When Bruce Springsteen stopped a concert to help a veteran having a panic attack. When Adele paused mid-song to comfort a fan who just lost her father. They're all echoes of what Elvis did that night in 1975. Because he set a precedent, that the show can stop. That the performance can break. That sometimes the most powerful thing an artist can do is kneel down, extend a hand, and say, I see you. Your pain matters. Let's carry this together. Margaret's sister, interviewed years later, said that Elvis saved her sister's life that night. That Margaret had been planning to end it all. That the gun was already purchased, the date selected. But after that concert, after feeling seen by someone who had every reason to stay distant and untouchable, she chose to keep living. Chose to believe that if Elvis Presley could care about her dead son, maybe the world wasn't entirely cold and meaningless. She lived 28 more years. Saw her daughter graduate college. Held her granddaughter. Wrote letters to other grieving parents, sharing her story, encouraging them to keep breathing. And every letter ended the same way. If you need proof that compassion still exists, that humanity still matters, remember this. Elvis Presley stopped a show for me. The band members from that night, interviewed decades later, all said the same thing. It was the most powerful performance they'd ever been part of. Not because of Elvis's voice. Not because of the production value. But because 18,000 strangers became a family for 4 minutes. Because everyone in that room, for one song, cared more about a grieving mother than about themselves. And that's the real story? Not that Elvis was talented, we knew that. But that he was human. Deeply, beautifully, courageously human. When Elvis died 2 years later, Margaret Walsh attended the funeral in Memphis. She stood in line for 11 hours with thousands of others. When she finally reached his casket, she placed a single object on the flowers, a new baseball. Signed by her, not a famous player. The inscription read, "Danny's waiting for you. Thank you for the song, Margaret." The security guard who found it later said he almost removed it. Protocol said only flowers. But something stopped him. He left it there. And when they sealed the casket, that baseball went with Elvis. 2 objects, 2 stories, forever linked. Today, if you visit Graceland, you can request to hear recordings from the 1975 International Hotel Residency. Listen carefully during "Can't Help Falling in Love." You'll hear it, 18,000 voices singing together. And if you listen even closer, in the silence between verses, you can almost hear what Elvis whispered to Margaret that night. The words nobody else heard. The promise that made her choose life. That's not the legend talking. That's the man. And that man changed everything.